Greetings. This is the Introduction to Cultural Anthropology online teaching module concerning livelihoods, and in this we'll consider 4 different video clips taken from the Gebusi in Papua New Guinea concerning different aspects of subsistence, and also at the end somewhat in relationship to aspects of exchange, and a little bit on the relationship between production, distribution, and consumption. The first of the 4 clips concerns horticulture, or the food production in a simple, rudimentary way in the New Guinea rainforest. And the second concerns sago processing, which is kind of halfway between food production and wild food gathering or foraging, insofar as the large sago trees, they do grow wild, but in most cases they're planted specifically and then harvested by a subsequent generation of Gebusi. The third video clip is casual foraging in the rainforest as we're going along, particularly with respect to nut resources. And then finally, in relationship to those nuts that are gathered, the 4th video clip describes aspects of exchange and sharing and casual ways of articulating the procurement or production of the resource, its consumption, in some cases on the spot, and aspects of distribution that relate to general features of exchange. So collectively, these 4 video clips, which total about 16 minutes in total, review some aspects of Gebusi subsistence, horticulture, and foraging, and the kind of dynamic relationship between them, as well as aspects of production in relationship to distribution and consumption at the end. So I hope you enjoy these, and the questions will follow afterwards on the online assignment. Good luck.
Okay, here we are in a garden. We just paddled upstream from Gasumi Corners to a garden site that senior man Uok and his son and brother-in-law, my good friend Sayo or Gisai, have cut. And actually the garden stretched on both sides of the river here, so it's kind of interesting. We're standing in a garden house, which is a small house kind of thrown together pretty quickly, so that people can stay and have a place to sleep overnight or be as they need to with some shelter in the garden. And so you see out, first we have our resident spider, actually not very large by local standards, but kind of interesting. And stretching out on the other side of the Kum River is the new banana garden, and you can see how cleared it is relative to the rainforest areas around it. They've chopped the trees down, planted the banana suckers that grow up between the tree vines, and then the branches of the trees chopped down provide some shade and protection against soil erosion, very ecologically friendly. And then the banana suckers sprout up and grow with the blaze of the sun into full plants and bearing fruit, which is hoisted high enough, quickly enough so that the pigs don't eat it before it gets ripe. So it's a really efficient way to have gardening, and having gardens right along the river is very efficient also, because then they can put the food produce right in the canoes. And in fact, over the years I've noticed that the Kum River has many fewer big logs in it and many fewer big trees along the side, because so much of the bank has been used for gardening. And there's still plenty gardening area left. You can see on both sides of the gardens that are here, there's other big trees. So by no means a problem of land pressure yet, but certainly a wonderful kind of location. So taking us around a bit, we can see we're standing in the garden house of an older garden, and most of these banana sucker plants or trees, small trees, have already borne fruit and been harvested. And we're overlooking the river here in this little garden house. You can see the sago thatched roof, just like in some of the main houses, and also the flooring from the habi tree. Very amazingly efficiently done. And little accoutrement here, like a spear with a metal tip for fishing, and some of the palm spathe plates, or also used for sleeping mats. And the lower part of the house with the cooking hearth, also very, very traditional. So these kind of garden spots are really very relaxed hangout places. People to get away from the main settlement, enjoy company of close relatives, spend some time, do some hard work. But after the trees are cut, there's really not a lot of work to do. It's a very efficient way of gardening. And sometimes they also plant other kinds of crops as well, root crops, and have a little bit of crop rotation among different sources of starch. And the bananas, along with the sago, that we had shot on other segments, are the main starch staples. So bananas that grow from these plants. And we think of bananas in a Western sense, we think of these little sweet things. And some of them are like that, but there are 36 varieties of bananas among Gebusi. Some of them are really long, some are really tiny. Most of them, although not all, are starchy. So they're more like what we would call plantains. You really couldn't eat them easily before cooking them, and they have starch, but they're not so sweet. And Gebusi, of course, know all the different varieties of plantains or bananas, and they cook them directly on the fire and scrape them off, and that's a main starch staple. Probably even more so than sago. Certain seasons sago is big, but bananas are probably the biggest starch staple of all. So in a sense, we're here in the breadbasket of Gebusi food production in terms of the starch staple of their landscape. And the other thing about gardens that's interesting is the ones that are in the bush, when you walk to and from them, you're kind of exploring your landscape. The gardens are not all right close to the settlement. You may have a half-hour walk or a canoe ride up. And when you're in the forest, you're also looking for things to hunt, seeing what the status of the fruit trees are, whether they're bearing, and a lot of wild resources. So Gebusi's subsistence, as described in the chapter of Gebusi on subsistence, combines food production through horticulture or domestication of plants and gardening or farming, along with other foraging activities and collection of wild resources, and some of which are kind of cultivated but partly wild. So nut trees, sago trees, and of course things that you would get fishing, sago grubs, other kinds of things that you would get. So the banana gardens and gardening is an integral and major part of a larger pattern of Gebusi subsistence, and here we are kind of in the heart of it, upstream on the Kroom River. Okay, well, here we are at the sago swamp area, right close to where our house is, probably about 5 or 8 minutes walk away. And this sago tree was cut down just this morning. Abi, the council member of the area, or one of the leaders, gave a big exhortation last night as to how they would love to have some food for our feast that they're preparing before we leave. And this is a cut down sago tree. It's been chopped just this morning. You can see how long it is with the fronds extending out at the top. And it's also covered with thorns before they get them off. You can see a few of the thorns there, and some all around. And then the man cuts the tree down at the base and then pries off the bark, which you can see here, enough to expose the inside pith. And the entire length of this up into the fronds is sago starch pith, which is food. But in order to make the food, you need to process it. So the women take this implement here, which is an adze, what we would call, which used to be, it's wood, and it used to have a stone haft in it, and now they have a metal tip. And the women pound it like this and chop off the pith. It's a lot of hard work. So the man chops it down, pries off the bark, and then the women do the hard work, laborious work of chopping out the pith. And then it ends up with this kind of dusty kind of substance. And sago starch actually used to be used for shirt starch in the United States for a while. So it's pure starch. There's no protein in it virtually at all, but it can be kept for an awful long time, and it's a tremendously plentiful source of food. And these sago trees grow wild in some places, and then other places they're planted, and then the next generation is able to harvest them. So Abi last night made a speech about the importance of getting food ready for our final feast in another week or so, and he kind of took action himself to chop down a sago tree this morning, and then we can go back over and describe maybe a little bit of the process by which the sago itself is made. Back over at this trough, it's kind of swampy here, so we're taking our pudding carefully. So here's Abi's wife, who's pressing the starch into in this trough and pours leaf buckets of water over it, and the water flows out and leaches into this trough. And the trough has got really hard packed starch from about up to here, and the rest of it is water. And then when it all sediments down, the water will be poured off, and the starch and the sago starch will dry, and it forms very large, heavy blocks that can be kept for long periods of time to add to other parts of a meal. It's one of the starch staples of the Gebusi diet, along with bananas. So, process of cutting it down, and then pounding the pith, and then leaching the pith, and getting it into here. It's a lot of work, but it yields a tremendous amount of pure starch calories, which are one of the main Gebusi starch staples. And it's also one of the main foods they use for feasts. So combining it with greens or coconut or other things that we may see later is one of the main aspects of Gebusi subsistence. And so we're here in the late afternoon with our little video of subsistence, and it's actually fairly traditional. There's really very little except for the metal tip on the end of the adze and the steel on the axe that would have felled the tree that is non-traditional. Although with steel you can cut through sago and other trees much more easily than you could with a stone axe, which is what they had all the way until 1963, or just a very few, first contact in 1963, and metal tools, steel tools coming in at that time. Okay, here's the landowner chopping a dugong, an okari nut that he just found at the base of the tree. Great example of opportunistic foraging. We're just kind of motoring along in the forest, and all of a sudden we find a dugong nut ripe at the base of the tree, so we'll split it open and chop it down. A couple of minutes ago we saw a bush hen nest, again along the trail, a large flightless bird called a megapode, and when the eggs are ripe in that, they're really delicious, like a 5-egg omelet. And so this is an example of kind of combining what would be just opportunistic foraging of wild food resources along the path. And if you're going to a garden or doing other kinds of travel, you'd keep your eye out for anything you could eat along the way. We also saw a cassowary, a flightless bird, a little bit like a small ostrich, fleeing away in the forest. And we're joking that if we had a bow and arrow or a shotgun, we would have cassowary for dinner. So that's an example, again, of kind of opportunistic foraging, hunting, gathering of anything you can find en route to and from the forest. And these are really good. The native word, the Gebusi word for this is dugong. And just a couple of days ago, I laid down dugong as a gift exchange name with one of the owners of the land that Livelihoods was on. Actually, it was Hawe, who was with us in Livelihoods and who was born there. And this is a shot just of the forest. It's really just amazing to walk through the forest. beautifully serene birds. We saw a flock of beautiful blue big birds. It's just a wonderful place. Very benign too. Not many wild animals that are dangerous. Pigs are dangerous if hunted, but they'll generally stay away otherwise. A few snakes, but other than that, it's really a very plentiful, benign place. No poison ivy that I know of. A few poisonous spiders, but it's really pretty benign. People love the sense of their land, where they are. For us outsiders, it's kind of a challenge to walk through. You got to pick up your feet really high or you'll go flying over roots as we kind of motor along. But incredibly serene, unbroken, pristine rainforest from the underside of the forest canopy. So here, following up on the story of the dugong nuts, here we found a whole bunch of them that we're chopping up, and I asked them what they're going to do with these, because it's a lot of great protein. Gebusi don't have a lot of protein in their diet. These nuts are really protein rich, so it's a really, really good food resource. So I'm asking them, what are they going to do with them? Now you see he's giving some away to our group, but they said they're going to take a bunch of them down to the next village we're going to, Yehibi, which are people, they're Gebusi, but they're not related directly to anybody here, really. And they could just eat them themselves or give them to other people or take them back to the village. But instead, they're sharing some of them to us, but the rest of them they're going to give to the people next in the next village, just as a pleasant gift. So that's an example of kind of generalized reciprocity or gift giving, not through obligation. And the people in the next village would never know if they had found nuts and hadn't brought them. The other thing that's important here is that these trees, this dugong tree, is a durable plant resource that was planted by his probably like grandfather. We don't know the exact relative. But we're in the deep wild rainforest, but this area used to be a settlement of sorts, and the distant ancestors would have planted these trees so that the descendants could later eat from them. And in a contemporary situation, it's also important because it establishes the clan ownership of this land in a modern sense, even though no one's physically living here now and there may not be any written land title to it. So these are all things that are interwoven and important in terms of ecology, subsistence, gift exchange, and even the use of land in modern circumstances.